also have some famous thinkers. I think they had a mathematician who calculated pi to the seventh digit.
That's right, Mr. Zhu Chongzhi calculated pi, the first person, so giving misery to generations of people studying mathematics after him. Okay, that's one contribution. But other scholars, that's right. It's known as a scholarly place. Any names? Remember, Derek?
It's like generally a cultural center where a lot of like famous philosophers like Zhu Bailu and other like moralists from, and also the Kung Opera was based there.
So one name is Mr. Gu Yanwu. Have anyone here heard of Gu Yanwu before?
There's a writer that refused to submit to the Qing dynasty. He was in the Ming era, but I'm guessing he's from Kunshan.
You guessed right. There's a big statue of him in Kunshan. Peter, what do we know about Gu Yanwu?
Well, he was one of the most famous scholars of the 17th century. He was one of 3 or 4 people that is seen in retrospect as having shifted the nature of learning away from Neo-Confucianism towards empirical and evidential ways of gaining knowledge. And he has numerous writings and is seen today still as sort of one of the great thinkers of the time.
So it's possible, at least according to this case, but also if you go to the Kunshan Museum, there are the great thinkers of the 17th century, and I think in part because this region was its leading scholars, many of them loyal to the Ming. It didn't fare well in the early part of the Qing, and indeed, in terms of really matters of great distinction, at least according to this case, nothing happens between the 17th century and the latter part of the 20th century in Kunshan.
I just wanted to comment, it's the area where there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, I guess you can say, because in the last case we talked about Wanshan Group, and that's Zhejiang, so it's right, it's in that region. And I'd say there's a buzzing entrepreneurial spirit there.
There's an interesting question. So we have the case of Mr. Lu, who kind of from the bottom up in Hangzhou becomes this great entrepreneur. Can you name a famous Kunshan entrepreneur? Hala?
Wang An?
An Wang, as he would be known in this country. He was an engineer from Kunshan, trained through the government, the national government, sent to the United States to study abroad during the war, founded Wang Computers. Your parents and grandparents now will remember Wang Computers. Wang Processors, it was a hugely successful company here in Massachusetts, set up their headquarters in Lowell, Massachusetts, and sometime in the mid-19th, it was the first word processor, the first kind of computerized word processor, going from the typewriter to a standalone word processor. And the one thing that Mr. Wang was absolutely convinced was that the word processor would be around forever, but the personal computer had no future. This was wrong, as it turns out, and Wang Computers is now dead as a doornail if you go to Lowell, and their headquarters still basically uninhabited. When Wang was doing well, one of our predecessors, John Fairbank, got Mr. An Wang to give our Fairbank Center 2 or 3 postdoctoral fellowships in Chinese studies, which we now still to this day called An Wang Fellows. So he lives on in spirit, in scholarship. Who's the leading entrepreneur in this case? It's a really good question, Jake, to think of where entrepreneurship comes from and what this case is about. Who would you say is the leading protagonist here, Catherine?
Guan Aiguo.
Guan Aiguo. Okay. Who is Guan Aiguo?
He's the head of the town, Kunshan, the party leader.
He's the party secretary of the town of Kunshan, which is basically outranking the mayor. He's the party secretary, the Chinese Communist Party secretary of the town of Kunshan, and how would you think of him as an entrepreneur?
He supported the idea of investing heavily of their own money into development.
Whose money? His money? He and his brothers? His mother and his father? Kind of family business?
The town's money.
The town's money, right. Right.
Developing this ETDC before they had government support.
Okay. Henry?
What I think is also striking about him is communist officials in Kunshan, they would come here, they would engineer this marvelous economic growth, and they would be promoted onwards. But this man has remained here for quite a while, and I think that's indicative of his, not only of his loyalty to this place, but also of his personal investment in Kunshan as well.
Yeah, and I don't think we know all the reasons of this. Would be very natural for somebody of his accomplishments to have been promoted to a provincial, and this may yet happen. As far as having met him a few times, there are several things that strike me. He is an entrepreneur in some sense, like Lu Guangqiu. You meet him and you know he knows the bottom line, the profit and loss statements of every private company, major private company in Kunshan. And he cares about them. He's the party secretary, but he knows business, and he knows it really well. He's a cosmopolitan in his tastes and in his interests. So what does the case call him? There's a word in the case. Eric?
Entrepreneurial bureaucrat.
An entrepreneurial bureaucrat. Now, is that a good thing? You think it's a good thing?
The way that I see him, he's just like an entrepreneur in that he's a visionary who believes in the markets, and throughout this decade, 2 decades of time, he dedicates himself to this vision that he has and makes it happen, and takes some innovative solutions in the process. But at the same time, he's still a government official, and he makes the most of that. So he's brings the best.
Now, what's the difference then between an entrepreneurial bureaucrat and a bureaucratic capitalist, if you know that term, which, well, you may or may not have come across somewhere? Henry, what's a bureaucratic capitalist? Somebody called you a bureaucratic capitalist, would you be pleased?
Probably not.
It's not something that's in the case, and something you could either know. In Chinese, it's gualiao ziben, bureaucratic capitalism. And there's a lot of it in China today. There's a lot of it. But what is that, and how would you distinguish it from what this guy appears to be doing? It's a complicated thing. But you just happen to be, let me just, let's see, who would this be? Robert, you're the Minister of Railroads. And you also happen to have some interest in a steel mill. You maybe, or some members of your family have interest in a steel mill that provides steel for the high-speed rails that are being built. And maybe another family member is associated with one of the construction firms that is building the elevated rail system between Beijing and Shanghai. And maybe another close friend or family member or classmate with who you're closely associated and gives you periodic gifts has the concessions on the railroad. And maybe you get really unbelievably rich. That's something like this happened to the last Minister of Railroads, at least so it is he's accused of. That's kind of bureaucratic capitalism. You're in charge of a ministry or of an enterprise or something, but you also have a huge personal financial stake in it. In this case, there's no evidence of this in the case of Guan Aiguo or in the case that this guy is like a guy who's trying to bring business to a local state or municipality here in the United States.
Do you think there's a connection between this history of the place as a place of scholarship and the decision to try to work with Duke?
That's a great question.
No, I'm serious. What do you think?
Without question. So the Party Secretary Guan Aiguo, who has really been an extraordinary mover of Kunshan's development, but also in bringing Duke to Kunshan, certainly talks about it in this. It's also, I think, part of other developmental. I mean, we can talk about it. Let's get back to that point, because I think it's if you go and visit the History of Kunshan exhibit, right down across from the City Hall in Kunshan, you will see mentions of the great scholars of the past, without question, but not for long. Then you move very quickly into Kunshan as a modern economic development zone, for which universities are important. But it is without question part of their heritage. Kat,
It's also
You think
famous-
Professor Bohl is right?
Well, I was going to say it's also famous for hairy crabs.
It's very famous for hairy crabs. Okay, so this is really important. Do we know if this craze of hairy crabs, the most difficult food to eat on earth for a foreigner? Chinese, you're born with the talent to eat these things, but they're delicious. They're absolutely delicious, expensive, and they've been grown in this lake in Kunshan for centuries. But I don't know, and Peter, do you know? Is there a long history of hairy crabs on Qing menus, Ming menus?
Not that I know of, Bill.
All right.
But I don't know. Is this a modern fad or not?
We don't know. Anyone who can answer this question gets an extra point. So, center of scholarship, historically. Center of hairy crabs. Center.
It's also a center for culture. So like their opera is really.
So Kun Opera also. Kun Opera, I was going to say, so center of scholarship and of culture, historically. Kun Opera. Anyone here heard Kun Opera? So Professor Bohl, you like Kun Opera?
Sure. It's the great Southern style.
It's the great Southern style. I have to tell you, my personal, I hate Peking opera. It gives me a migraine every time. I'm just bang, 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 bang. Kun opera is more delicate, more interesting, more engaging stories, and it doesn't go on so long.
Lots of love stories.
But lots of love stories. It can go on pretty long, but it's really quite wonderful and constantly being reinvented, and still today in Kunshan. So it is a place of great kind of classical background. What is its agricultural basis before 20, 30 years ago? Kennedy?
Made a lot of cloth and silk.
Silk, for sure. So when I first took the train from Nanjing to Shanghai, it was nothing, you could see nothing but farms. It would have gone through part of Kunshan, what is now this larger town, the town of Kunshan, and then now city. But there was mulberry trees everywhere along the way, because this was one of the centers of Chinese sericulture. And today, every time I take that same train, which now takes about a third of the amount of time, I can't find a single mulberry tree. And in Kunshan, there must be some, but there aren't a lot. So it has a distinguished agricultural and cultural history. So now think of its modern development history. What distinguishes this place? Why write a case, apart from the Duke operation, which is extremely important, but why write a case about Kunshan?